Most people who come into a surgeon's office worried about their hooded eyes think the same thing. They think it started a few years ago. They think it's aging. They think if they just got a little procedure done, removed a little skin, tightened things up, the problem would be solved. And for some of them, that's partially true. But here's what almost nobody tells you, and what the science has only recently started to confirm: a significant part of why your eyes look the way they do has nothing to do with time. It has nothing to do with how much sleep you got or how much sun damage you've collected over the decades. It was decided long before you were born. It was written into your DNA by ancestors who lived in places so extreme, so brutal, so unforgiving, that their bodies had to adapt just to survive. And one of those adaptations is sitting right there on your face. In this video, I'm going to walk you through what genetics and DNA analysis have actually uncovered about hooded eyes, where this trait came from, why it's spread across entire populations, which genes are responsible, and what all of that means if you're someone who's thinking about doing something about it. Because understanding the origin of your eyelids changes everything about how you approach the solution. Stay with me to the end, because the last section is the one most people never hear about. Before we get into the DNA, let's make sure we're all looking at the same thing. Because hooded eyes is one of those terms that gets used loosely, and if you don't understand exactly what's happening anatomically, the rest of this video won't land the way it should. So let's build the foundation first. Your upper eyelid is a layered structure. Underneath the skin, you have a thin muscle, a firm strip of connective tissue called the tarsal plate, and a fat pad sitting above all of that behind the brow bone. In a classic non-hooded eye, the skin of the upper lid folds neatly at a visible crease. And when your eye is open, you can see a clear strip of eyelid between that crease and your lashes. It looks open. It looks awake. There's visible real estate on the lid. In a hooded eye, that equation changes. The skin above the crease, sometimes carrying extra fat, sometimes just excess skin, droops downward over that crease. It covers part or all of the visible lid. From the front, the eyelid appears smaller, heavier, more closed off. Some people can barely see their crease at all. Others have a crease, but it disappears the moment they look straight ahead because the overhanging skin folds right over it. Now here's something important. Hooded eyes are not the same as ptosis, where the eyelid margin itself sits too low. They're also not the same as a monolid, where there's no crease at all. Hooded eyes have a crease, it's just hidden. That distinction matters enormously when it comes to treatment. And it matters just as much when it comes to understanding the genetics, because the genes that create a hooded eye are doing something very specific to the skin, the fat distribution, and the bone structure underneath. That's exactly where the science gets interesting. Here's where most conversations about hooded eyes stop being casual and start being genuinely surprising. Because when researchers began studying this trait seriously, not just observing it clinically, but actually running the numbers on inheritance, what they found was striking. A landmark study published in JAMA Dermatology looked at over 1,000 twin pairs from Eastern European populations and measured the heritability of sagging eyelids. The technical term is dermatocalcinosis, which is that excess upper eyelid skin that creates the hooded appearance. What they found was that the heritability of this trait came in at 61%. That means that for the majority of people walking around with heavy, hooded upper lids, the dominant explanation isn't sun damage, isn't years of eye rubbing, isn't poor skincare. It's the DNA they were handed at conception. Twin studies are some of the most powerful tools researchers have for separating nature from nurture. When identical twins who share 100% of their DNA show far greater similarity in a trait than fraternal twins who share roughly 50%, that's strong evidence the trait is genetically driven. And for eyelid shape, that's exactly the pattern researchers keep finding. Identical twins tend to share nearly the same eyelid structure. Fraternal twins diverge far more. The same study that established that 61% heritability figure also pinpointed a specific genetic location involved. A single nucleotide polymorphism, a one-letter variation in the genetic code near a gene called TGF-beta, already known to influence skin aging, emerged as a major driver of whether someone develops that characteristic eyelid droop. You can actually look this marker up in your raw DNA data from services like Ancestry or 23andMe. The variant is found at the RS11876749 location. Whether you carry the C or G allele at that position influences your predisposition to this trait. Your eyelids, it turns out, were partly scheduled. So we know the trait is heavily inherited. We know there's a specific marker tied to it. But hooded eyes aren't controlled by a single switch. This is what geneticists call a polygenic trait, meaning multiple genes, working together, produce the final result you see in the mirror. And once you understand which biological systems those genes are operating in, the whole picture becomes a lot clearer. The first category involves skin structure genes. Your upper eyelid skin is the thinnest skin on your entire body. It has almost no margin for error when it comes to collagen and elastin, the proteins that keep skin firm, structured, and lifted off the lashes. Variants in the MMP gene family, which govern how your body breaks down collagen, influence how quickly that eyelid skin loses its scaffolding over time. Some people inherit MMP variants that are more aggressive collagen degraders. Their skin thins faster, their lids hood earlier. It's not a lifestyle choice, it's a biochemical inheritance. The second category involves the TGF-beta signaling pathway. This pathway controls how connective tissue is remodeled throughout your body, including around the eye socket. Variants in this pathway affect how tightly or loosely the structures around your lid are maintained as you age. People with certain TGF-beta variants tend to see earlier and more pronounced changes in lid architecture. Then there's the DCHS2 gene, identified through genome-wide association studies scanning thousands of faces across multiple populations. DCHS2 influences facial cartilage and soft tissue development during embryonic growth, meaning it shapes the scaffolding your eyelid is built on before you even take your first breath. There is also the LAMA1 gene, linked to basement membrane integrity, which subtly influences how the lid's foundational layers hold together over time. No single gene explains your eyelids, but together, these variants build a blueprint that was locked in long before the world ever saw your face. If hooded eyes were purely random, just a genetic accident with no pattern, you'd expect to find them distributed evenly across all human populations. But that's not what the data shows. When researchers map this trait across the globe, clear geographic clusters emerge, and those clusters tell a story about where your ancestors lived and what pressures they were living under. The highest prevalence of hooded and heavy upper lids is found in populations of East Asian descent. This includes people with ancestry from China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, Mongolia, and across Southeast Asia into Polynesia. In many of these populations, the hooded appearance is combined with either a monolid or an epicanthic fold, that small skin fold at the inner corner of the eye, creating a distinctive overall lid shape that is different from the hooded European eye, but driven by overlapping genetic mechanisms. Among populations of Native American descent, the trait is also extremely common. This makes genetic sense. The ancestors of indigenous Americans crossed into the Americas from Siberia and Northeast Asia thousands of years ago, carrying with them the same genetic variants that shaped East Asian eyelid structure. The trait crossed continents with the people who carried it. In European populations, hooded eyes are especially concentrated in Scandinavian, British, German, and Slavic ancestry groups. Studies have found that roughly 18% of Northern Europeans carry what researchers describe as significantly heavy upper lids. In Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, upper eyelid surgery to address hooding is notably more common than in other parts of the world, a direct reflection of how prevalent the underlying genetics are in those populations. What this geographic clustering tells us is that hooded eyes didn't appear randomly. They appeared where survival demanded a specific kind of face. The environment shaped the gene pool, and the gene pool shaped the eyelid. Understanding which population cluster your ancestry falls into is one of the most useful pieces of information you can bring into any consultation about your eyes. Now we get to the part that most people find genuinely remarkable. Because once you understand that hooded eyes cluster in specific geographic populations, the obvious next question is why? What were the forces that made this trait so common in those places? And the most widely cited answer in the scientific literature takes you back to some of the harshest environments human beings have ever tried to survive in. Picture Central Asia and Siberia during the last ice age. Temperatures dropping to extremes that are almost incomprehensible by modern standards. Wind cutting across open steppe with nothing to slow it down. Snow covering the ground for months at a time, reflecting sunlight back upward with an intensity that could damage unprotected eyes. In those conditions, your ability to see clearly, reliably, without constant irritation and damage was not a cosmetic concern. It was a survival issue. People who couldn't protect their eyes effectively were people who couldn't hunt, couldn't navigate, couldn't function. And people who couldn't function didn't pass on their genes. The leading theory among researchers is that the extra fat pad and heavier skin fold around the eye evolved in these populations as a biological shield. The additional subcutaneous fat surrounding the eyeball provided insulation not just for comfort, but for the eye itself and the surrounding sinuses, which are vulnerable to extreme cold. Think of it the same way you think of the fat layers found in animals adapted to Arctic conditions. It serves the same fundamental purpose. The fold itself, sitting across the upper lid, reduced the aperture of the eye, the amount of exposed surface area facing the wind and the glare. Less exposed eye means less moisture evaporation, less cold air contact, and critically, less ultraviolet light entering from the snow below. Researchers describe this as a narrowing effect, not enough to impair vision meaningfully, but enough to make a measurable difference in protection under extreme conditions. The populations that carried these genetic variants survived in greater numbers. They passed those variants to their children. Over thousands of generations, the trait became dominant in those regions. Your eyelids, if you carry this ancestry, are the biological memory of an ice age. Here's where the cold climate theory runs into a problem. And it's a problem that forced researchers to expand their thinking considerably. Because if heavy eyelid folds evolved purely as protection against Arctic cold and snow glare, you would expect to find them only in populations from cold northern regions. But that's not what the data shows. The trait appears in places that have never seen significant snowfall. Places where the challenge isn't cold, it's heat, altitude, and ultraviolet radiation so intense it can permanently damage unprotected eyes within a generation. The Khoisan people of southern Africa are one of the most studied examples. They carry epicanthic folds and heavier upper lid skin despite living in some of the warmest environments on the planet. Their ancestors never needed protection from freezing winds or snow blindness. What they did need protection from was something equally relentless: the UV radiation pouring down on open savanna and semi-desert terrain, reflected and amplified by sand and dry earth, the same way snow amplifies it in the Arctic. Different environment, same biological problem, same evolutionary solution. Then there are the populations of the Tibetan Plateau and the high-altitude regions of Central Asia. At extreme altitude, the atmosphere provides far less protection from solar radiation. UV exposure at 15,000 feet is dramatically higher than at sea level. Researchers have proposed that the heavier eyelid fold in these populations served a similar shielding function, reducing the amount of high-energy light reaching the surface of the eye across a lifetime of exposure. What this tells us is that the hooded eyelid trait wasn't one solution to one problem. It was one solution to several different problems that happened to share the same root: unprotected eyes in unforgiving environments. Cold and glare, heat and radiation, wind and dust, the specific threat changed depending on where your ancestors lived. The biological answer, written into your eyelid structure, remained remarkably consistent. Nature found this shape and kept it across vastly different landscapes because it worked. Before I show you the last part, if you want to look at your own results and see where hooded eyes fit into your bloodline, I put a full 3-volume PDF bundle over at the OriginDNA website. It shows you how to read your raw data and find matches beyond what Ancestry or 23andMe tell you. Link is in the description. But stay right here, because what comes next is the part most people completely miss. So far we've talked about survival, cold climates, UV radiation, desert environments, the idea that hooded eyes spread because they help people live longer and pass on more genes. That's natural selection, and it's a compelling story. But here's what the more cautious researchers are careful to point out. Not every trait that becomes common in a population became common because it helped people survive. Sometimes traits spread for entirely different reasons. And for hooded eyes, 2 of those reasons deserve serious attention. The first is genetic drift. This is what happens when a trait becomes common not because it's advantageous, but because of random chance. Imagine a small founding population, a group of a few hundred people who crossed into a new territory, became geographically isolated, and began reproducing largely within that closed group. Whatever genetic variants those founders happened to carry, regardless of whether those variants were helpful or neutral or even mildly harmful, would become overrepresented in every generation that followed, simply because the starting pool was so small. Researchers call this a population bottleneck. The people who made it through carried certain variants. Those variants multiplied. The trait became characteristic of that population not because nature selected for it, but because chance preserved it. The second mechanism is sexual selection. This is mate preference driving genetic change. If individuals within a population found a certain eyelid shape attractive, or associated it with trustworthiness, strength, fertility, or any other quality that influenced pairing decisions, then people carrying that trait would have more offspring on average. Over many generations, that preference alone could push the trait to dominance without any survival advantage involved whatsoever. The honest scientific position is that for hooded eyes, all three mechanisms, natural selection, genetic drift, and sexual selection, likely played a role at different times and in different populations. The cold climate story is compelling and well supported, but it probably isn't the whole story. Your eyelids may be the product of survival, of chance, of ancient beauty standards, or most likely some combination of all three written across thousands of years of human history. One of the most fascinating things that modern DNA analysis has made possible is the ability to trace exactly how physical traits moved across continents with the people who carried them. And when you map the migration routes of ancient human populations onto the geographic distribution of hooded eyes, the overlap is striking enough to stop you in your tracks. Let's start in Siberia. Around 15,000 years ago, a population of Northeast Asian hunter-gatherers began moving eastward across the land bridge that connected Siberia to what is now Alaska. They were carrying specific genetic variants, including those associated with heavier eyelid fat pads and folded upper lid skin that had been shaped by tens of thousands of years of survival in extreme cold. Those people became the ancestors of indigenous Americans. And today, across North America, Central America, and South America, the descendants of those migrations still carry eyelid genetics that trace directly back to Siberian ancestry. The trait crossed an ocean on foot. Now move westward. Uralic-speaking peoples from Siberia began migrating into northern and eastern Europe in waves that researchers now estimate arrived between 8,000 and 3,000 years ago. Genetic studies of modern Scandinavians, particularly Finns, Estonians, and populations in northern Norway and Sweden, show measurable Uralic and Siberian ancestry woven into their genomes. That ancestry brought with it the same eyelid variants that originated in cold-adapted Northeast Asian populations. This is why hooded eyes are so prevalent in Scandinavia. It is not coincidence. It is a genetic echo of ancient migration preserved across hundreds of generations. Ancient DNA research has also shown that the first Scandinavians were themselves the product of two separate migration waves, one from the south following the retreat of ice sheets, and one from the northeast along the Atlantic coast. Those two founding groups merged, creating a population with unusual genetic diversity for its time and region. The physical traits that emerged from that merger, including heavier upper eyelid structure, have persisted into modern Scandinavian faces. When you look in the mirror and see those hooded lids, you are quite literally looking at the outcome of Ice Age geography. Here is where the story becomes personally relevant in a way that most people haven't considered, because understanding that hooded eyes are genetic doesn't just explain where they came from. It also explains something that confuses a lot of people when they start noticing changes in their face. Why some people develop significant hooding in their 30s, while others don't see meaningful change until their 60s, even with similar lifestyles, similar sun exposure, and similar skincare habits. The answer, increasingly, is written in the genome. Remember the TGIF1 gene and the RS1 1876749 variant identified in that landmark twin study. What makes this finding particularly significant is that TGIF1 is already established as a skin aging determinant, meaning it influences not just whether you develop excess eyelid skin, but when people carrying the more active variant of this gene tend to experience collagen breakdown around the eyelid area earlier and more aggressively than those with the less active version. Their skin thins faster, their lid folds descend sooner. The genetic clock on their eyelids simply runs at a different speed. The MMP gene variants we discussed earlier compound this effect. MMP enzymes are your body's collagen-degrading machinery. They exist for good reasons: tissue remodeling, wound healing, normal cellular turnover. But in the delicate skin of the upper eyelid, aggressive MMP activity accelerates the loss of structural support. People who inherit high-activity MMP variants are essentially working against a faster biological tide when it comes to lid skin integrity. Then there is the role of bone structure, which is also genetically determined. As we age, the skull itself loses volume. The orbital rim, the bony frame surrounding your eye, resorbs gradually, releasing tension in the overlying skin. People who inherit a certain orbital geometry, partly governed by genes like RUNX2, which shapes craniofacial bone development, tend to experience this tension loss more dramatically than others. Their brow bone provides less structural support over time, allowing the lid skin to descend with less resistance. What all of this means practically is that if your parents or grandparents had significant hooding by a certain age, your DNA is likely running a similar program. Knowing that is not a reason for resignation. It is a reason for earlier, more informed decision-making. So you've made it through the genetics, the evolution, the migration routes, and the molecular biology. Now let's bring it all the way back to the practical question that a lot of people watching this are quietly sitting with. What do I actually do about it? The first thing to understand is that knowing your genetic baseline changes how you should approach any consultation. If your hooding is primarily structural, meaning it's the shape you were born with, driven by inherited fat distribution and bone geometry, the solution is different from hooding that is primarily age-related skin laxity, accelerated by genetic collagen breakdown. A surgeon who doesn't ask about your family history, who doesn't look at photographs of your parents, who goes straight to removing skin without assessing the full picture, is working without crucial information. Your DNA is part of your medical history. Treat it that way. For people whose hooding is driven mainly by excess skin, the dermatochalasis we discussed, and upper eyelid blepharoplasty remains the gold standard. A surgeon removes a precise, carefully measured amount of skin, enough to restore the visible lid without compromising your ability to close your eye fully. When done correctly by an experienced specialist, the results are clean, natural, and long-lasting. For people where the brow position is the primary driver, where the outer half of the eyebrow has descended below the orbital rim due to gravity and muscle changes, removing eyelid skin alone will not solve the problem and can actually pull the brow down further. In those cases, a brow lift to reset the foundational position is the necessary first step. For people with true ptosis, where the eyelid margin itself sits too low because the levator muscle attachment has stretched, the fix involves reattaching and tightening that internal muscle. No amount of skin removal addresses that problem because the skin is not the problem. Non-surgical options, including wrinkle-relaxing treatments, ultrasound tightening, and volume restoration with fillers, can all provide meaningful improvement for the right candidate. But they work within the limits your genetics have set. Understanding those limits going in gives you realistic expectations and better outcomes. Here's what I want you to take away from everything we just covered. Your hooded eyes are not a mistake. They are not evidence of neglect or poor aging or bad luck. They are a physical record of survival of ancestors who endured conditions brutal enough to reshape human biology, and who passed that reshaped biology down through every generation until it landed on your face. That is not a flaw. That is a story. But understanding the story doesn't mean you have to live with something that bothers you functionally or aesthetically. Knowledge and action are not opposites. In fact, the whole point of understanding your genetic baseline is that it makes your decision sharper. It tells you what you're actually dealing with. It tells you what category your hooding falls into, what timeline your biology is running on, and what kind of intervention actually matches your specific anatomy, rather than a generic treatment plan built for someone else's face. The science on this is moving fast. Genome-wide association studies are identifying new variants every year. The picture of exactly which genes and which combinations produce which eyelid shapes is becoming more detailed and more actionable. If you have your raw DNA data sitting in an Ancestry or 23andMe account, there is more information in there about your face than most people realize. Whatever you decide, whether that's surgery, a non-surgical option, or simply understanding yourself better, go in informed. See a specialist who looks at all three layers of the problem. Ask questions, know your family history, and remember that the eyes looking back at you in the mirror have been shaped by thousands of years of human endurance. They deserve to be understood before they are changed.
Thanks for watching this video, but before you go, don't let your DNA results just sit there unanswered. Tap the link on the description to download your ebook and find out what your raw data is hiding.